Hey guys, Nick Rosacci here, and I've been getting some questions about my take on the Spec Travelers sound redesign contest, specifically the underwater scene. For those of you who didn't know about the contest, the requirement was to redesign a 12-second scene with only the recordings provided. There were less than 20 sounds, all made with an electromagnetic field microphone. Because of that, the sounds were electronic in nature, but I was able to take a sound and recreate an entire underwater scene, which happens in the middle of that clip. Here's that entire video that I had to redesign. So with that, I did the entire underwater section except for the Foley for the movement with just a single beep. Usually, I am of the firm belief that the best way to make a sound effect is to start with a quality sound recording that's as near as what you're trying to achieve as possible, but obviously, it's not always possible depending on the circumstances. But what's really cool in audio is that you can take basically any sound and make it into any sound with the right amount of processing. It takes a lot of time to figure it out, so unless you want to spend hours making, say, an underwater sound from a beep, start with an underwater sound so you can just spend your time on other parts of the design. For the first step, I don't remember the exact process since I didn't save that step, but after some experimenting, it seems the whole process here wasn't even required, so we'll just work around that. I'm going to basically leave the files the way they were, but I'm willing to bet you can go through this process with just about any beep starting the same frequency. So use what you can if you're trying this. So the first thing I did was pick a single beep in one of the recordings. This one here was clear with no extraneous sounds in it. Originally I took this beep with an idea to make it more of a sonar/woodblock type sound, but the effect didn't really work in the completed draft. But I used that woodblock to become the base sound for these next three effects. The first effect was a noise track. This became useful in a number of places in the entire video, most notably to create the splash. A synthesized splash is just mostly basic automated EQ and a granulated noise, and while I won't really be going through how I made the splash, here's how I made the noise track. I took the woodblock sound I created, I pasted the transient numerous times across the timeline. It's not snapped to any rhythm, but it's just to get a bunch of instances in there. Here's the effects chain. Each thing in here was important to make the sound, be it subtle or drastic, and there's a lot of noise and fuzz, so I started there. These are just the basic fuzz settings on the JS Distortion plugin. The next step may not be needed if I use the original beep without repitching it, but basically I brought the sample back up something like 6 octaves with around 4 octaves of formant. The idea of noise is that it's consistent throughout the entire frequency spectrum, so I used the EQ to try to even out the frequencies of this sound. There was one specific tone, like a sine wave, that I did try to EQ out, but it wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be perfect, so just in the ballpark. The reverb there is to really smooth out the transients. You can hear the difference when you go back and forth. It's really drastic at a 20-second decay time, but it really did seem to be the best setting. Now, because the signal was getting weak at this point, I used a peak limiter as a booster to bring the volume back up. Then I reshaped the result again with another equalizer. Distorting the whole thing was the next step, so I used Trash 2 with a preset called Broke Down Factory. This gave the majority of the character of the sound here, but everything else was really required to get to that point. One more frequency shaping EQ, and I had that noise. I bounced this to a track and used it where I needed it. For the bubbles, I started with an automated pitch shifter, which worked on an LFO and skewed upwards over time. I shaped that sound with EQ, then added a preset called Trash 2 Underwater. Which got us into a good place. Added reverb, boosted the volume, shaped it a little more. Then to get some bubbles motion, I added a phaser and flanger to it. We're already sounding pretty good, so I could have stopped here, but I wanted just a little more. I used a Trash 2 preset called a meower to bring the high end back out a little bit. EQ'd out everything above 1K because it started getting too noisy up there. Added a delay to make the whole thing wider. Then one more reverb to smooth out the bubbles. The decay time when I stop the playback doesn't really matter since I'm bouncing this to a track and using it as a pre-recorded track in the scenes, so the decay part wasn't going to get in the way. The water file is really close, and as a matter of fact, one of the files was just further processed into the other, and I don't really remember which one was first, and they're both close enough in the same thought process, so I don't think I need to run down the other file. Anyway, this is just my thought process on doing some pretty drastic audio manipulation. I hope this helps some of you guys. Good luck in your projects, and look forward to hearing some of yours.